Hi, everybody. Thanks for checking in and watching this video. I'm sure, as you've gathered by now, either from the topics that we've covered so far or if you've thumbed your way through the textbook, that this is not a how to write a press release class, how to do a posting on the company Facebook page, or how to make your CEO look good on TikTok. That's for another class. It's called PR Writing. It's next semester. I think it's being offered Tuesday afternoons. This is about the nuts and bolts of doing public relations because, you see, you have to understand the nuts and bolts before you can be an effective public relations person. When you get out and work in the business, you're going to find yourself confronted every now and then with situations where the CEO, the vice president of finance, somebody higher up the food chain than you is going to come steaming into your office with something, and they're going to say, we got to put this on the company website or put this picture on Instagram. And you're going to look at it and you might say to yourself, I don't think so. So you have to have, first of all, the ability to stand up to whoever the CEO or the VP or whoever it is that's coming in making the somewhat outrageous request. And trust me, it happens. It really does happen. But to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure this makes sense, you need to understand the nuts and bolts. So that brings us to the topics for this week. The nuts and bolts topics about relationships and culture. And I posted some slides about relationships, and I'll talk for a moment or two about culture. But the important thing about relationships when you're doing public relations is really understanding where you stand with the people that your organization has to interact with on a daily basis or on a regular basis. What about your public relationships? If you're doing public relations for a nonprofit, for example, where do you stand with your donors? How do they feel about you? What about the donors who stopped donating? Do you know why? Might be interesting to find out. It's called doing a donor survey. You have news-driven relationships. You need to understand your relationships with the people in the news media that you're dealing with, whether it's a local TV station, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's an industry publication, and that will change from industry to industry. There are all kinds of publications out there that deal with particular industries that most of us have never heard of and will probably never read. For example, I worked for about a year for Raytheon down in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and they made submarine things, missiles and torpedoes and bombs and all kinds of stuff that I couldn't even get access to sometimes. But there were all kinds of publications that we dealt with that I never heard of. Underwater Weapon Weekly. I'm making that up, but making it up to make the point. They were big in the industry, and my task was to establish those relationships because they had fallen apart over the years, and the public relations position had been vacant for a while. So it was very interesting for me to kind of build these relationships with these people, writing for publications that in fact I had never heard of. So you have to understand the relationship with the news media that you're dealing with, and in that we can include bloggers. Bloggers are very important depending upon the industry. I've probably mentioned to you before in the auto industry, bloggers are very, very important, and people in the auto industry pay attention to what bloggers are writing. I think we've seen in the food business, really anybody can be a food critic, and people are posting reviews on, their Facebook page or on Facebook groups about restaurants that they've been to. So it's important that if your particular thing is working for a restaurant, that you pay attention to that. You also have to pay attention to your relationship with other people in the business. What is your relationship with your vendors? What is your relationship with your competitors? And competitors do have relationships. Maybe not in the upper level will they admit to it, although they probably go off and play golf a couple times a year. But certainly, down in the nuts and bolts part of companies, people who work in, the communications department, for one company, will have relationships with people in the communications department at another company, or people in accounting or finance or whatever, because you belong to, similar groups, for example, and you meet and you swap stories, and even though you're competitors, you kind of take advantage of things that each other has learned. And as we've talked about before, when I talked about the service profit chain, the importance of relationships with employees, that is a big part of understanding relationships. If your employees are not on board with what it is that you're doing, then you have a big problem. So relationships is the first thing you're going to be reading about this week. The second thing you're going to be reading about is culture. And this is something that has become an emerging topic over the last few decades. As companies have expanded, as companies have become more international, as companies have, opened up divisions really in other parts of the country. There's a lot of difference between working for a company in the Northeast and working for a company in the South. There's just certain different work styles. Never mind if you're working for a company, that has a subsidiary in, let's say, Brazil, and you have to get information to them, and you have to interact with them. You have to understand the culture. You have to understand how they respond to work. You have to understand the importance that they place, for example, on family. You have to understand how they approach work hours. When I worked for the Italian Renewable Energy Company, they quite often didn't start work till 10 o'clock in the morning. And that was because they put, one, emphasis on family, but two, they didn't have dinner till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, which of course drove the hungry Americans really crazy when we were ready to eat at 5 o'clock. But we often wouldn't have dinner till 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, which meant that they really weren't turning in till 11 or 11:30 or 12. So coming into work at 7:30 or 6:30 or whatever, wasn't exactly expected. So you have to understand all those cultural differences and how they play in to how you communicate with, not only your employees, but with your competitors, with the people you're trying to get business from. Again, I'm going to turn to Raytheon for a minute. The head of marketing who I worked for told me that he was going to Chile to meet with people in the Chilean government. And I assumed he'd be gone for a couple of days. He was back by the end of the next day. He left that night, flew to Chile, had his meetings, hopped on a plane, turned around, came back, was in the office by the end of the day. I just kind of wandered by and looked in, and I was like, what are you doing here? I thought you were going to Chile. Oh, yeah, I did. Now I'm back. Okay. So that's how, people can operate. And those are all things that in the public relations area, we have to keep in mind. So I have an assignment posted for you for this week. I'm also going to post a video that I'm going to ask you to watch, and I'm going to propose a brief discussion question for you to respond to over in the discussion section of our class website, our class Blackboard site. So please watch this video. I hope you are. please watch the slides that I've posted. There are a couple of good videos in there, including, I think, the first link you're going to come to is called Enel. That's the Italian company that I worked for, and you're going to get a sense of their commitment to corporate social responsibility and being responsible in the energy sector. Have a homework assignment for you, and I'm also going to post a video for you to watch, which will be, sort of like our time in lieu of class. So, hope you all have a good week. Once again, thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you next Monday.